Hello, your friendly neighborhood host here again, JT Wheatley, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time on the life of Joe Sinnott, one of the great inkers of the comic book medium. Of the many unheralded jobs in comic books, inkers are one of them, especially since that infamous scene in Kevin Smith's 1997 film classic Chasing Amy, in which they are accused of being tracers, specifically Banky, played by a stalwart Kevin Smith actor Jason Lee. In truth, inkers provide an essential job in comic books, as they help enhance and interpret the original art the pencilers laid down, fixing mistakes and setting the mood. A good inker can save sloppy art, while a bad inker can ruin good draftsmanship. Many are also pencilers in their own right, using their talent to help out the artist. Simply put, a good inker is needed in comics, and one of the greatest was Joe Sinnott, who worked on nearly every Marvel book from the 1960s to 1980s, enhancing the pencils of legendary artists like Jack Kirby, John Buscema, and George Perez. As much as Kirby and Steve Ditko, it was Sinnott who helped develop the classic Marvel look that made their comics so popular, and he is a prime example of the importance of inkers. Joe Sinnott was born on October 16, 1926, in the Catskill Mountains, Sagittarius, New York, one of 7 children to Catherine and Edward Sinnott. He demonstrated his drawing skills at age 3 in kindergarten with his first box of crayons, which he received from a teacher that stayed at the boarding house his mother ran. Sinnott started drawing everything he could find before eventually copying strips like Terry and the Pirates and Flash Gordon. He also loved Congo Bill and Action Comics #1 over Superman because he was similar to Jungle Jim, the comic strip by Alex Raymond, creator of the Flash Gordon. Sinnott also loved movies, radio dramas, and serials like many kids of his time. As he got older, Sinnott served as the art director of his high school yearbook, though he was disappointed that his schools only presented 2 classes on representation and design as far as art instruction. Thus, he had to learn anatomy from comic books. After high school, Joe Sinnott enlisted in the U.S. Navy during World War II with the Fighting Seabees in Okinawa, driving a munitions truck. It was part of ceding to his mother's wish not to be drafted into the Army, as his brother Jack had died while serving in the U.S. Army's 3rd Division. After completing his service in May of 1946, Sinnott admitted to piddling around for 3 years, playing sports while working in a limestone quarry in his father's cement manufacturing plant. However, the winter of 1948 in New York would be one of the coldest in history, and unable to go outside, Sinnott finally decided to go to school. Sinnott went to the Cartoonist and Illustrated School, CIS, now called the School of Visual Arts, in March of 1949 on the GI Bill, submitting his art samples to Silas Rose, the CIS head, who then gave them to Bernie Hogarth, the school's head instructor. Both were impressed by Sinnott's samples, and especially since he had no training, which got him into the school. There he was instructed by numerous professional artists the school would bring in, notably Milton Caniff, the legendary comic strip artist of Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon. Another instructor was Tom Gill, famous as the penciler of The Lone Ranger, comics by Dell, and he would help Sinnott get into the comic book industry directly. Soon, Joe Sinnott had his first professional work published with his feature Trudy in Mopsy No. 12 on September of 1950. That same year, he married his fiancée, Betsy Kurlaski, in August during the school's 2-week vacation. They will be married for 56 years until her death. Tom Gill was one of the original instructors at the Cartoonist School since 1948 and would mentor numerous talented artists during his tenure, such as Herb Trimpe, who we mentioned in the previous episode. While teaching, he still maintained accounts with Timely, the future Marvel, Fawcett, and of course Dell, teaching during the week while working nights and weekends for his comic book companies. Joe liked Joe Sinnott's talent and made him one of his assistants. Sinnott would work with Joe for 9 months while attending school, working nights and taking the Long Island Rail to Joe's studio to work for all weekend. Soon, Sinnott was doing most of the work on some assignments, such as Kent Blake Detective, which he penciled and inked. Figuring he was ready to set out on his own, plus having a wife to support now, Sinnott made his play for Timely through Stan Lee, figuring he couldn't turn him down. Despite leaving Tom Gill, he and Joe Sinnott would remain friends, and Sinnott's credits working for Tom Gill as one of the best teaching experiences he ever had. After graduating the Cartoonist School, Joe Sinnott went to Atlas, the future Marvel and former Timely. Founder Martin Goodman loved to avoid paying taxes, and to work with Stan Lee in 1951. Sinnott also returned to his hometown of Sagittarius after leaving New York City for 3 years due to school. Reportedly, he approached Lee directly, pointing out that he did most of Gill's work on Red Warrior and Kent Blake. Impressed, Lee handed Sinnott a script, The Man Who Wouldn't Die, which would later appear in Apache Kid number 8. And the rest, according to Sinnott, is history. While there, Sinnott stated that Stan Lee was a brilliant writer, able to produce stories in nearly every genre, from westerns to science fiction, and would eventually leave school as his work got more steady, doing features like The Adventures in the Town, The Arizona Kid, and Arrowhead. However, things took a downturn when Frederick Warren published his book, The Seduction of Innocence, in 1954, which blamed comic books for juvenile delinquency. This led to the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency, which forced the comic book industry to form the Comics Code Authority, regulating its content, as a result, restricting the industry and practically banning horror comics. More than a few of those Sinnott did features for, such as Only 12 of Us May Live, Cry Werewolf, and Drink Deep Vampire. While the public decried these horror tales, Sinnott said artists like him loved them because they really got to cut loose with their talent. During his early run at Atlas, Sinnott produced 1,300 pages for the comics like Adventures into Fear, The Arizona Kid, and Battlefront, but with the new CCA, Sinnott soon found himself looking for work and nearly didn't get it at DC, as he was a Marvel guy, according to one editor. Thankfully, another editor grabbed Sinnott before he left, saying he liked his art and gave him a work. With comics on the downturn, what work Sinnott could get was less than before, with Stan Lee being forced to cut page rates at Atlas in 1957 to 58 due to losses in sales. Some artists went into advertising, teaching, or just left the business altogether. As for Joe Sinnott, he suffered as well, having to leave Atlas for a 6-month period, while his page rate was cut from the average of $46 to $21. He would work in commercial advertising while finding works at Classic Illustrated in Charlton, and even worked with Vinnie Coletta, his first inker. By 1963, they would produce 600 romance stories, 27 pages total for Charlton, especially for Coletta, who was adept at depicting beautiful women. Sinnott would call Coletta one of a kind, able to get the job done, though would take a shortcuts that altered the art originally penciled. Of interesting note, due to the nature of Sinnott working in Sagittarius, he only met Vinnie Coletta in person for the first time in 1975 at a comic book convention. In 1959, Joe Sinnott rejoined Marvel Comics, the former Atlas, when Stan Lee called stating they were back in business. However, due to the new CCA restrictions, he could no longer show direct violence as before. He was also doing Treasure Chest and Fun Facts, which did features on historical figures from Babe Ruth to JFK. Sinnott also worked on the monster books, which were trendy in 1961, inking It Was Trapped by Titans, the monster that time forgot, for Tales to Astonish number 10. This would be one of the first times Sinnott worked with Jack Kirby, who previously inked most of his own pencils. Sinnott also inked Jack Kirby's pencils on Doom Under the Deep in Battle number 69 in April of 1950, and then Sinnott worked on the Fantastic Four number 5, which featured the first appearance of Dr. Doom. Of note, Sinnott didn't even know what the Fantastic Four was due to living in the Catskills and thus was out of the comic scene. Joe Sinnott's work schedule was at 7:45 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and he credited his inking skill with balancing blacks with the panels on the page. On Friday, Sinnott would show up at the Marvel offices with his completed assignment, and Stan Lee would give him a new script, which he then took back home and worked on from Monday to Thursday before returning again. All this was done by mail, while Sinnott never went to New York City except on special occasions and, of course, to visit the offices. Thus, he wasn't aware of everything that was going on and how Marvel was suddenly reviving the comic book industry. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby loved Sinnott's ink so much they offered him the following issue of Fantastic Four number 6, but he was committed to doing Treasure Chest, the story of the Pope's project, thus he had to turn it down. Sinnott did ink Jack Kirby's pencils on Journey into Mystery number 83, August of 1962, which was the first appearance of Thor, along with doing the cover. And after his Treasure Chest assignment was complete, he penciled and inked 5 more Thor stories in issues number 91 to 92, 94 to 96, from April to September of 1963. Thor would be one of the big characters Sinnott loved inking, along with Captain America, the Hulk, and the Silver Surfer. As for Fantastic Four, Sinnott wouldn't return to the comic until issue number 44 in November of 1965, and would continue for 48 issues in number 92, then coming back for number 95 to number 101. Sinnott loved the art and story by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were producing, and he would join them in introducing the Silver Surfer, Galactus, the Inhumans, and the Black Panther, all which was done in the epic issues number 44 to 52 run on Fantastic Four, still the high watermark of that comic book series. Once again, due to the nature of his work being an inker, Sinnott never met Jack Kirby face-to-face in 1972. as Sinnott, of course, rarely visited the Marvel offices, mostly just worked out of his studio in Sagittarius. Sinnott also stated that the level of detail that Kirby put into his pencils made it a lot of work, but it was definitely satisfying, as he considered Kirby one of the fastest but most versatile artists to ever work in the business. He even did work in the unfinished Fantastic Four number 102 due to Jack Kirby leaving abruptly from Marvel to go to DC, which he received the unfinished pages in 2006 with finished art by Ron Frenz. Sinnott would continue to ink Fantastic Four up to the 300s, along with the Silver Surfer and the Mighty Thor, working with the likes of John Buscema, John Byrne, and George Perez. Of the artists, John Byrne, he would note on Fantastic Four, he would find himself correcting his mistakes at first, such as the neck length and the hairstyle. Part of the job of inkers is to correct these mistakes, as they're essentially artists themselves. Perez, he noted for his hyper-detailed pencils and ability to maintain continuity. Sinnott said you could have made a stamp of pencils that Perez penciled. Joe Sinnott continued to find work outside of Marvel as well, like Classic Illustrated number 554 on September 1958 on the feature The Enchanted Deer, while also working on America's Best Comics, Charlton and Dell. One notable work was penciling the one-shot biographical issue of the Beatles on November of 1964. However, by 1965, Sinnott was nearly exclusive at Marvel, inking on nearly every Marvel title and helping establish the Marvel look that helped make the company so popular. He loved working on the Avengers, such as issue number 100 by Barry Windsor Smith, due to the characters like the Scarlet Witch, Captain America, and Hawkeye, one of his favorites. However, Sinnott also loved working with Al Milgrom on the West Coast Avengers even more. He also worked working on Jim Starnenko's pencils on Nick Fury in Strange Tales number 166 and 68 and Nick Fury number 1, along with Captain America number 110 to 111. One thing he didn't like, though, was inking vehicles and stagecoaches and motorcycles, which he considered too much work. In the 1970s, Joe Sinnott was so ingrained at Marvel that you weren't considered a Marvel guy until he inked your pencils. And he would work on nearly every book that the company published, along with every artist from Jack Kirby to Neil Adams to Gil Kane. For the rookies like Jim Starnenko and Neil Adams, he would tweak their art in the right directions and his inks before they became the seasoned professionals we know today. By this point, Sinnott was the old man at Marvel, with 20-plus years at the company and using his wisdom and experience to guide young artists. Some artists needed a lot of more work, like John Buscema, whose art became so loose on books like Nova and Miss Marvel that Joe Sinnott received a finished art credit over inking, while Buscema was credited with giving layouts over penciling. Sinnott soon became friends with many of them, like Ron Frenz and Terry Austin, while receiving high acclaim from the rest of his comic book peers from his talent and professionalism. Outside comic books, Joe Sinnott loved sports and Bing Crosby, and as a result, he penciled several sports comics, illustrating the stories of Mickey Mantle, Brooks Robinson, and Pete Rose, while also doing covers for magazines like Crosby Magazine and the Bing Crosby Fan Club. Sinnott also worked in advertising in the 1960s and 70s as well, such as album covers and Hostie's Twinkies ads, which featured for Marvel, which featured the character Thor. To develop his technique when he was younger, Joe Sinnott copied comic strips like The Phantom and Johnny Hawk about a college athlete. As an adult and professional artist, Sinnott inked Marvel strips as well, such as Spider-Man, which he started back in 1992, and The Hulk, which he did for a short time as well. Through Spider-Man, he got to work with Stan Sakai, who lettered the strip, and he credits Sinnott with being able to help meet his deadlines, as of course he's also busy with his Yoshagi Yojimbo comic. Sinnott would retire from comic books to concentrate on inking the Amazing Spider-Man Sunday strip in 1992 and continued on in the series till it ended on March 22nd of 2019. With the strip's end, Joe Sinnott officially retired from the comics industry at the age of 92. He did sporadically work during that time on Marvel Comics as well, such as inking the Captain America number 1, Volume 6 variant cover by John Romita Sr., which is cover dated on September of 2011. Today, Joe Sinnott is considered one of the 3 greatest inkers in comic books, next to Frank Giacoia and Dick Giordano. He has received near universal praise from nearly every artist he's ever worked with, from Herb Trimpe to Murray Severn, and numerous awards for his contributions to the comic book medium. Notably, the Inkpot Award in 1995, the Inkwell Hall of Fame in 2008, of which he is named after in honor of that year, and the Will Eisner Hall of Fame in 2013. On July 27, 2007, the post office issued 2 commemorative stamps of The Thing and the Silver Surfer, which is penciled by Jack Kirby and inked by Joe Sinnott. Today, Joe Sinnott is still alive and living in